The bottom line, in case you fall asleep or have to leave early or you lose electricity at home. Ready? All together, start giving while you're living, because what you're right. And now it's not good for anybody anywhere. Here's how he begins. This is James. He wrote a letter in the first century to first century Christians. He lived in the city of Jerusalem. Actually, James was the pastor of the only Christian church, the church in Jerusalem, during the time after Jesus was crucified and raised from the dead. He took over and became the leader of the church. And he writes a letter that went to Christians in the vicinity of Judea and Galilee. And as part of the letter, he addresses some of us. And anyway, here's what he says. This is kind of rough. He says, "Now listen, you rich people." Wow. Now listen, you rich people. And this is the point where some of us are like, I'm just glad I'm not rich because this doesn't have anything to do with me. In fact, if you are reading the New Testament and you get to stuff like this, or you're reading the Bible, it's like, well, I just need to move on to the next section because whoever wrote this doesn't know anything about me because I'm not rich. And we begin looking around wondering who he's talking to and looking for all the rich people. If this is your first time with us, this is the season every year, or the time every year, when I remind all of us that we are richer than we think we are. And that the reason we don't think we're rich is because we don't feel rich. And the problem with feeling rich is that most of us have never felt rich except for the first time we got our first paycheck when we didn't have any responsibility to anybody else in the world. And that was the first time and really the only time many of us felt rich. I was 16 years old. I cleaned the meat department at Winn-Dixie in Tucker, Georgia. I was the last one to leave. And so on one particular weekend, I had to work extra hours and I got a paycheck for $285 back in the 70s. And I looked at that paycheck and I thought, what in the world could I do with this much money? I think that's the first and the last time I ever felt rich, right? But the goal is to feel rich, and we don't feel rich, and we don't feel rich for several reasons. Number one, for many of you, you have no financial margin. And no matter how much money comes in or no matter how much money you make, if there's no margin, there's no peace. In fact, many of you are making more money than you ever thought you'd make, and you still feel financial pressure. Financial pressure that would not make any sense to most people in the world. And the other reason we don't feel rich, and the reason we don't recognize where we actually are, is because we know what everybody else has. We know what everybody else drives. We know what everybody else wears. And then there's Instagram. It's like a curse, right? It's like not only does everybody look better than us, their children look better than us. In fact, their whole life looks better than my sucky life. And it's just terrible. And we think, wow, why can't I have more? Why can't I do more? Why can't I travel like that? And without meaning to, we fall into the comparison trap. But here's the reality. And you don't feel this. I don't feel this. And there's no way to make you feel this, and that's not even important that we feel this. But this is the reality. This is the starting point. This is a fact that we have to factor in as we think of what we have, what we will have, and more specifically, what we do with what we have. By international standards, if you have a household income or an individual income of $33,000, you are in the 1% club. You are in the top 1% of the wage earners in the world.